I'm going to show you the Whisky Immortal game played between Magnus Carlsen and Sergei Karjakin in the Lindores Abbey Chess Stars tournament. Now, this is a tournament that was sponsored by the Lindores Abbey distillery, a whiskey distillery. And the players actually played in this distillery itself among these enormous vats. And there was a beautiful aroma around them. Perhaps that influenced their play. It's hard to say, but it was a really special atmosphere. And, well, you're going to see a really special game here that was absolutely wild. I was actually there as part of the live commentary team, and I can say that it was a unique event, and the hosts, the distillery, really looked after everyone incredibly well. It was a lovely tournament. And there was a special moment before the tournament began where Mikhail Tal's son, Gera, had come over from Israel especially to present a chess set to Magnus Carlsen. And this chess set was very special because it belonged to the world champion Mikhail Tal. And it was presented to Tal by the Latvian government after Tal won the world championship in 1960. And it was a beautiful chess set the pieces were made of amber, which is the Baltic speciality. Mikhail Tal's son, Gera, wanted to pass this on to the world champion, and in the hope that this would live on, and maybe in the future Magnus Carlsen might pass it on to the next world champion. Who knows? But it was a lovely gesture, and Magnus Carlsen was really touched by it. Maybe that inspired him as much as the whiskey distillery into playing games like this. So let's crack on with the game. So this was played in round 5, and it was a very tight tournament actually. Magnus Carlsen was leading by just a half point. The pressure was really on him. And he'd drawn his first game against Karjakin in the first round, but actually Carlsen recently has been doing incredibly well against Karjakin. Before this tournament, Carlsen had defeated him in 5 games, 2 blitz games in the Ivory Coast, 1 rapid game in the Ivory Coast, and before then was Shamkir, and I think Tata still before that, I could be wrong, but anyway, 5 games where Carlsen had defeated him. So Karjakin does not have an easy time against the world champion. Now Carlsen has played one of his specialities, a pretty tame opening, just establishing this pawn chain. It almost looks as though Carlsen is playing with the black pieces here, as he's allowed Karjakin to take more space in the centre with those pawns. But, well, after this opening, these exchanges in the opening, actually Carlsen looks to have a slightly better position because this knight is very well placed on e5, of course. This knight on b6, perhaps not so great. So Carlsen starts to gain a little bit of an edge here, so just taking control of the file. That knight attacks the pawn. Now black doesn't want to play e6. In fact, I think that would lose material straight away to knight takes pawn. That could be embarrassing. So bishop e6, maybe not the best square for the bishop, having to support the pawn, but it somehow feels a bit cramped blocking this pawn. And now Carlsen plays a4, wants to push this knight again. And you can see that with this move, b3, excellent move, this means that those knights are slightly cramped. In particular, of course, that knight on b6. The square's controlled. So Carlsen is a little bit better here. And I think he forced some exchanges here, but actually I think if he dropped the bishop back to d2 here, that could have just put a little bit of pressure on black, because black has to keep an eye on that pawn on a5. But instead Carlsen went for knight b5. So there were some exchanges. And now Karjakin just countered White's potential play on the c file with rook c8. And at this point, actually, I thought the players were going to agree a draw pretty quickly. But Carlsen had other ideas. First of all, rook c5. Of course, he can trade rooks if he wants to, and it's just pretty equal. King f8. So Karjakin, playing very responsibly, wants to shuffle the king across. And again, if Carlsen wants to play solidly, he can bring the king across, and there's not too much happening here. But here is where Carlsen absolutely went for it. e4. Now, that is a move which opens Pandora's box in the position, because it releases White's pieces, but it releases Black's pieces as well. So it all kicks off from this moment. In fact, Carlsen said afterwards that he was playing a bit like Vladimir Kramnik. Well, if you remember, Kramnik played his last tournament, serious tournament, in Vaikanzai, Tata Steel tournaments in January, and he was just playing with a free hand, just going for it. And that's what Carlsen was doing here. It takes incredible confidence to play a move like this. I mean, Black can take this pawn, but, well, I think Karjakin played the most testing move, a4. And there is still a way for Carlsen to bail out here if he simply exchanges rooks and takes here. And this is going to lead to a draw. Basically, Black is fine here. Both sides are fine. But in spite of being pretty short of time, it's a rapid play tournament, Carlsen decided to take on d5, and he knew exactly what he was doing here. He knew that he was running an enormous risk. He knew that Karjakin could make a new queen from this position, but it's very, very complicated. So Karjakin exchanged rooks on c5 here. There's another way to go, which is that Black could push straight away. And let me just show you one crazy variation here. So White can't sensibly stop that pawn from going through. But it is possible to play like this. Watch this. Check. Well, taking the knight would be unfortunate because that allows rook takes rook checkmate. But Black is still alright here. Now, queen check. Actually, rook takes rook would transpose to the game. But Black can play rook d8. Now, there's a mad move here. Remember, White has just two minor pieces for the queen, but bishop c6 check is possible. Now, if the king goes to f8, then White is actually okay in that position after knight here. But let's see what happens if this is taken. So it's just a queen for a knight at the moment, but that pawn is very strong. And White's king is relatively safe. I mean, here's a plausible line. And now c7. And after this, well, it's actually going to burn out to a draw, because in this position, White can simply get the queen back with rook c8. And this arrives in a completely equal endgame. All right, a very long line, absolutely not forced, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the kind of possibilities there are on the board. So, just to recap, Magnus has just played e takes d5. And Karjakin now exchanged rooks and played a3. So this pawn is rolling home. Carlsen took, and now knight d7 check. Of course, if that's exchanged, then that's very embarrassing for Black. So after knight d7 check, the king has to move, and knight b6. It's possible to play pawn takes knight, actually. But I mean, that's just another way to play. Let me just show you this very quickly. So check. So at the moment it's bishop and knight for the queen, but white has the possibility to take the pawn on b7, but also attack the king. So in this position, black's king is not completely safe. This pawn is going to go. This bishop is en prise. So if here, then knight g5 check, followed by moving the bishop in. Whoops, I misfired. Move the bishop in here. You can take this one. One of those b pawns is going to survive. And it's just completely unclear, actually. So that was another way that Magnus could play the position. But we're back here after knight d7 check and king e8. So knight takes b6 played. Karjakin got a queen. I should mention at this point that both players were, their time was running way down. So, you know, that was added pressure. Karjakin was actually, by this stage, he'd caught up and he was slightly lower on time than Carlsen. Now, I think very sensibly, Karjakin played bishop e5, a practical move to exchange off the bishop pair. If you leave the bishop pair, that can be very dangerous. But it actually is possible to take the pawn on e6. And I just want to show you this, because again, this is another absolutely crazy line. This position rather reminds me of a study, actually. And I think it was Botvinnik who said that studies are pure tactics. You know, there are no niceties about pawn structure, about long-term strategy. It's pure tactics, and that's what this is about here. So white has a threat to push straight through. So let's say bishop d4. So the knight moves out of the way. So this is very tricky. So pawn number 2 is potentially coming through. So even if this bishop takes here, you've got a check, and then b6, b7, and the bishops control all those squares. It's very, very dangerous for black. So bishop takes f2, counterplay, check, and b6. Looks serious. Okay, let's have a look. Bishop takes pawn. The pawn goes on, so white threatens to get a queen. So check, and the bishop comes back. Now, it's possible to win that bishop, but actually white's pieces are a little bit scattered, and black should be all right. So knight e5 check. And now, bishop e3. You can see that white's king is relatively safe because that bishop controls these crucial squares here. So obviously, if bishop takes bishop, then white gets queen. Here, knight e7, the knight comes in. And now, basically, this position is going to end in a draw. Seems like everything ends in a draw. So you just chase the bishop, and black can't escape that, but white can't make any more progress either. So another very long line. Again, not completely forced, but an interesting one all the same. Okay, so after king h2, as I said, instead of pawn takes pawn, I think Karjakin played the practical move. You want to exchange off pieces here, exchange off those bishops. And Carlsen could actually exchange off, but instead he just dropped the bishop back to e3 again. You know, they were playing on instinct here. They didn't have enough time to calculate. And that's a practical move. You keep the two bishops. And bishop takes b7. So, as in that last line, it won't be too long before white just, you know, withdraws these pieces and starts pushing the pawns. So again, Karjakin wants to exchange those bishops. And here, well, Carlsen played a move which looks decent, knight c4, and it is decent, it's okay. He actually could have pushed this c pawn. Again, let me show you this. Another crazy variation. c6, So just to stress, this did not happen. So if bishop takes knight, then you can see that those bishops are just in the perfect positions to shepherd the pawn down the board. So after c6, bishop takes bishop. And now white doesn't need to recapture, but he can just play c7 to get a queen. But in fact, here black is okay. If the knight moves, remember this is under fire, but if the knight comes back, then check and checkmate. That will be awkward. So let's come back. So queen c7 played to guard the knight for the moment and crucially guard g3. But then black can make a draw. Once again, it's a draw because that knight drops and this position is just equal. Incredible how it always seems to settle in the end. So back here. So that was pawn to c6, but Magnus didn't do it. He played what looks like a very sensible move, bringing the knight back towards the king's side. So the king is supported and clears the way potentially for these pawns to run down the board. So queen b2. And as I said, Karjakin around here was down to seconds. He went, I think the closest he got was maybe 3 or 4 seconds remaining. They did get 10 seconds added to the clock each time they moved. So he wasn't completely running out of time, but still a very nervy position. And I think, there's this cliche that all 3 results are possible. And I think that was really the case here. And I think it kind of justifies Carlsen's play. Instead of drifting towards a draw way back, he's got the position he wants, basically, which is just complete chaos on the board. Lots of tactics, and Karjakin almost going over the edge on the time limit. And here, very cool move from Karjakin. He just shuffled his king across to blockade the pawns. If queen takes c5, this is risky because the queen is now tied to stopping the pawn, and suddenly black has to contend with this knight flying into the position. I can understand why Karjakin didn't do that. In fact, he's still okay, but only if you tread carefully. But king d8 is a very cool move, actually. So the king is able to blockade those pawns. Just have to be careful that this knight isn't flying into the game somehow. But Karjakin has that one under control, as the queen is now free to move. And here white can just wait, actually. But an extraordinary decision by Carlsen. He was obviously still trying to generate chances here, and he disturbed his nice fortress around the king with g4 in the hope of maybe squeezing black on the king's side. Incredible. But Karjakin, I think, reacted very well, and after this, basically, there's a queen trade. There's a pawn trade rather, not a queen trade. They exchanged pawns very soon. But yeah, still, both sides had to be very careful. Very easy to get your queen caught in a fork or something, and pawns were traded. So Carlsen was able to keep that pawn on b7, and here, well, I think it's pretty clear that this position is a fortress, because the king and queen, one of them has to take care of the pawn. In any case, it's not really possible to break down this fortress here. So here they actually agreed to draw. A fantastic game, full of crazy ideas, and really bravely played by both players. And that's why it was dubbed the Whisky Immortal. Well, whether it deserves that, I don't know. But it was certainly really good fun, and what a fantastic tournament it was. Remember, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, then do click on that button below. And if you want to support us as well, then do click on the links to patreon.com and PayPal as well. Thanks for watching.